Explorations. Probing global diversification. We travel the world so you don't have to.
Welcome. My name is Ronnie Nyogetsu Reishin Seldin, and that was the Japanese end-blown bamboo flute called the Shakuhachi. It was a section of my composition, Makoto Shinjitsu, and stay tuned for the healing art of the Shakuhachi.
Hello and welcome to this show. Today we're going to learn about the Shakuhachi. It's a Japanese bamboo flute. And my guest, Ronnie, will tell us all about it. He's a master Shakuhachi performer. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in, now I need some help trying to pronounce this. Shakuhachi? You must laugh every time someone mentions that.
Oh, that was, at least you didn't say Shakuhachi. Yeah, Shakuhachi is fine. And I've always been a musician. And in the late 60s and early 70s, I was in a kind of a classical / rhythm and blues band that made 3 albums and generally starved. And then in 1973, my first wife and I went to Japan, and we kind of did whatever she wanted. She always had wanted to go there, so she was interested in Japanese poetry and tea ceremony, flower arrangement. But as soon as you go there, they ask you, well, what are you going to study? And I said, well, kind of finished college a few years ago, didn't have studying in mind. But they make it pretty obvious that all the traditional arts are still alive, so it's a waste not to study something. And I picked Shakuhachi and shiatsu. I was terrible in shiatsu, but I stuck to Shakuhachi.
What is it about the Shakuhachi that intrigued you?
Well, by the way, Japanese is very simple. It's just as exactly, sometimes people see these funny letters together, but it's exactly the way it's spelled. There's no silent letters or, it's not that hard to once you get the hang of it. But it has a lot of depth in the music, and as being the only music played for as part of Zen Buddhism. Zen means meditation, and the shakuhachi is the only melodic instrument that's part of Zen Buddhism. It has even more depth, and it was played as a tool towards enlightenment. That's not to say you can't get the same thing out of any musical instrument, but for me the guitar was never quite like that, because I was kind of spoiled. My father played guitar, and learning it in the mid-50s, by the time folk music came into the United States, I was making my living like 12, 13 years old, teaching folk music on guitar. And it was kind of spoiled for me. I just wouldn't pick it up unless I got paid for it. So I never felt like that about shakuhachi. And every time I pick it up, it's been a very happy career for over 41 years. I've always gotten something out of it or learned something new.
Oh, that's wonderful.
My teacher called it a whole world of depths. There's different depth. That's why I use the word deep. There's different depths that you can always go to with the shakuhachi. Yeah, at least I can.
How would you say it changed you?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, around the late 60s, there was a whole probably movement in the United States, probably Canada as well, but I can't speak for Canada, but to look east for wisdom and look east for ancient sages and everything else. And I guess we were all a part of that, and we wanted to, we were all, there was, with the psychedelia and mind expanding drugs and everything else, came along with looking towards the east in religion and other things. So I was always interested in religion also. I majored in that in college, and in humanistic natural religion. So I ended up being active in a Japanese religion called Tenrikyo as well.
Are you still involved?
Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm not familiar with that religion.
They have a real big church in Toronto.
Oh my.
But they really don't like to. Japanese are shy. They don't like to push themselves on people. And Tenrikyo is a very Japanesey. It has a lot of Japanese rituals, Japanese language, and it doesn't attract many non-Japanese, quite honestly.
What is it that you like about it?
About Tenrikyo? Well, it was started by a woman in 1868, and she basically believed that you should try and make other people joyful, kind of the opposite of original sin.
So is now the shakuhachi, has it always been a healing instrument, or is it a certain certain way that you play it?
Well, the emphasis, although I know you have my CD that focuses on healing, the emphasis is more on meditation, really. And as a meditative tool, that's a type of healing in itself. So that's how it got accepted into, well, Zen means meditation. And Zazen is sitting meditation. And when you play the shakuhachi, it's called sui-zen, or blowing meditation. But it's the same end. The end is to, my teacher would say, it was to be a bodhisattva, or to try and save the rest of humanity before you enter nirvana yourself.
Wow.
It's good. It's a lofty goal. So also to try and play the perfect sound to cause world peace. So it gives me a great goal to go for every time I pick up the flute.
So have you achieved your goal with
world peace yet? I would be happy if there was. No, but it certainly is, first of all, a very peaceful way to make a living, a way to have a career as a musician, what to do. And I found out early in the music career that we were an electric band, even though we weren't as loud as some, being half the band from Juilliard Music Conservatory and half the band from Rhythm and Blues. Still, we met a lot of very famous musicians of the day in the late 60s, and almost like without exception, people's personalities was reflected in the type of music they did. So if you were a loud electric band, you kind of were a loud person in general, and we met a lot of people that played very soft, sensitive music. They generally were more soft and sensitive. So with the shakuhachi, since it's more meditative, it does help you become a more meditative person. And the type of people that I run into, because I've probably had about 1,000 students in 40 years, are generally, almost without exception, nice people to run into. Like I often say to students, because I trust them, with very expensive instruments, I often say, well, you don't kind of meet the kind of people who would be holding up a 7-Eleven if you're a shakuhachi teacher. So generally speaking, they're trustworthy and, good people.
Are you still a student? Are you always continuously learning more about your instrument?
Sure, in a way. Every time I pick it up, although I'm not taking lessons, haven't for quite a while, but my main teacher, who gave me my first Grand Master license and my professional name, died in 1980, and in 2002 or 2000, I think it was 2002. I should look at these plaques I have all over. The Living National Treasure, who's still the Living National Treasure, gave me my second Grand Master's license and my second name. That's why, if you look at my name, it says Ronnie Nyogetsu Reishin Seldin. I usually make a joke, as I'm growing more this way, I need more names under my photograph to fill out the picture.
You have a wonderful sense of humor.
Thank you.
Have you always had this great sense of humor, or has it changed through the years?
I'm pretty comfortable with topics relating to myself or shakuhachi.
Now, you have mentioned your music is healing.
Mm-hmm.
Are there some songs that are for certain healing purposes? I noticed the one song it helps with childbirth. Could you explain that one a little bit?
Well, yeah, I thought if you like, I would play that one today, as it's one of my favorites. there are many versions of sanya. Sanyasu means safe and easy childbirth, but Jimbo Sanya is this one monk, Jimbo Masanosuke's version. He spent his whole life just learning really two pieces. This is his rendition of sanya, and I've had students that acted out, one in particular, what you're supposed to do with this, which is when the mother-to-be goes into labor, the KOMUSO, or the mendicant priest, who's traveling around playing these pieces, would play this piece during the labor, and also they would pass uncooked rice through the flute. I have to say that because once somebody said to me, "Doesn't the rice stick in the side of the?" No, you pass uncooked rice through the flute, and then you cook it during the labor, and then after the birth. And for a safe afterbirth, also the new mother eats the rice, and during the labor, the KOMUSO plays the piece. So one of my students in Philadelphia did this with both his children, and they were both successful. So far we're batting 1,000.
That's great. So that was a quick, easy childbirth for his wife?
It was, but it was safe and easy, and it wasn't complicated. Yeah.
That's a wonderful thing. And there's another song you mentioned. It's Maku Shinjitsu?
Makoto Shinjitsu is one of my compositions, which is pretty well received usually when I play it. It means with a heart of true sincerity. It's actually a Tenrikyo term. I did it for an anniversary in 1990 of the foundress of Tenrikyo. But I also picked those two pieces because if you have time to hear sections of them or the entire pieces, they're on very different instruments. One's on a shorter instrument, which is going to be louder and higher in pitch, and the other one a more ethereal, lower pitched, longer instrument. So it gives you quite a contrast, on the two pieces.
Are there certain methods, certain techniques that you do with your instruments to get certain sounds?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of extended techniques and gargling sort of techniques and circular sounds and mixtures of breath and tone, sometimes hardly any tone at all, sometimes no tone, just breath. It's wind through bamboo, so it's not always a pretty bell-like tone like you try for on the Western silver flute. It's much different. And that's why perhaps shakuhachi is also a very popular instrument amongst jazz musicians, and because they could do so many different things, or woodwind players or flutists that like to expand what they could do musically. But definitely a lot of different techniques.
I can't even imagine making those sounds that you are able to make with just a piece of bamboo. And is it 5 holes? Yeah,
and it's also not a fipple or a notched head like a recorder would have, which makes it harder. You see, the shakuhachi has just this cut off at the head, at the mouthpiece here. So you're just blowing 90% over the flute. Very little goes into the flute. As a matter of fact, so little goes into the actual shakuhachi that were I to light a match at the bottom, cover all the holes, and play correctly, it wouldn't even flicker.
I had no idea. That's wonderful. It's actually fascinating. My goodness, that's such a little bit of air.
A little bit of air, which makes it a devilishly difficult instrument at first. But the good news is everyone gets a good sound eventually, and everyone gets a sound eventually, and everyone gets a good sound eventually. I always tell beginning students that getting the sound and getting the good sound is really a low priority because it's impossible, almost impossible, to get a good sound right away. In Japan, they say it takes a week to get a noise out of the instrument and a month to get a musical sound. It's very humbling.
So for someone like me, I'm not, I can play piano or guitar, but a flute, I can't even imagine.
Well, I was on piano and guitar also. I had never played a flute before either, but you would get a good sound, but it's different on different people. And fortunately, the happiest students I have are the ones who believe me when I tell them that and don't get frustrated because of how difficult the sound is. I had a student once that took a full year to get any sound. She just got air, and she was patient. And I told her, well, I could tell from your where your head is, what your fingers are doing, whether you're playing the rhythm correctly, whether you're breathing in the right places. I could even tell, probably if you're sharp or flat, just from all that. And you just keep playing. We'll keep going on the repertoire. And one day, when the sound is there, we'll just continue. And that's what happened. She's been licensed for over 10 years now, and she has a following of her own. So she was just patient. Not everyone's going to be that patient, though.
My goodness. What do you have to say about something like that? Is that does that become a bit of an inward journey of perseverance, or?
It's it teaches patience. Yeah, a lot of things about Japan are humbling to somebody like myself, coming from a family that was loud and being rather loud myself, and all of a sudden you go to a quiet culture where people turn inwards, and I didn't know the language and I never studied it. So it took me about 6 months to understand what anyone was saying, and about a year before I could pretty much jabber in my pidgin Japanese. But you had to be patient. You had to be willing to sit around and literally your superiors, your senseis, listen to them speak for hours and hours, and maybe each day you'd get another word or two. Sometimes you get probably what you thought you understood is the wrong idea, but eventually I got to be fluent in Japanese that way.
I can imagine everyone must have questioned your choices. They must say, what is he doing? And what are they saying about you now?
Well, my teacher, after 2 weeks studying the Shakuhachi, my teacher said, well, what are you going to do when you go? I was 26 years old. My teacher said, well, what are you going to do when you go back to America? I said, oh, I'm going to be a Shakuhachi teacher. And it's a very pretentious thing to say. It's like after 2 weeks of studying chess or something, telling your teacher, I'm going to be a grandmaster for the rest of my life or something, So, but then as he kept asking over the next 2 years, he started seeing I was very serious about it. And he was very, very generous with his time and his heart. He gave me three-hour lessons a week. So it was like the equivalent of like 9 lessons a week. So I was able to get a lot of, it's basically all I did. I worked a little bit teaching English in Japan to make enough money, but it paid very well, so I didn't have to work very much. They say if you miss a day, you go back a week in your Shakuhachi level, so I was afraid to miss a day for the first 5 years. So I practiced for at least 4 or 5 hours every day.
Wow.
Serious musicians got to do that, again, on any instrument.
That's it sounds like quite a discipline that you put yourself through, especially at such an early age. Well, to me, when I was 26, I wasn't disciplining myself like that. Most 26 years.
As I said, I never did for the guitar, but I didn't have the love for guitar. Not that it's not worthy of loving, but I didn't have it because of my own particular circumstances, as I did for the Shakuhachi.
I'm fascinated by the different techniques you use. Like you mentioned, that only a little bit of air will go in the top of the flute. Is there something else that makes it very different from the metal flute? Something else you can mention?
It's hard first of all, when you put the flute, one reason it's so hard to get a sound is everyone wants to put the shakuhachi right on the chin where it's comfortable. Well, I wish the chin was built for the shakuhachi, but it wasn't. And with most people, it's going to have to go right on that bone, the jaw. And I discovered probably in the last 10 or 20 years that rather than to try and get people to look at what I'm doing and make it exactly the same, I have a way of equalizing that fact, which isn't the distance from the jaw to the lip, but from the lip down, because everyone's distance is going to be different. But if you take the flute about like straight out and feel the cutting edge, and this is a cutting edge made usually out of bone it can be made out of a number of different materials, but it's generally made out of a water buffalo horn. It could be also, sometimes it's polyurethane, it could be ebony or ivory, which isn't so common nowadays. But it is a hard cutting edge, because if you blow on and get it soft, bamboo is a grass. it'll get soft over the years and get too rounded. But you could blow on this cutting edge all you want. I've been playing this one for about 20 years, and it's still sharp. Anyway, if you feel the cutting edge in the middle of your bottomlet, back it off to about 45-degree angle. It's going to be right on that bone, most people. And then if you don't change the angle, but just push it straight up, just force it straight in there, that's an equalizer. That's where the sound happens for everyone. Now, all you people out there who have a shakuhachi and haven't been able to get a sound, try that.
You're intriguing me. I'd like to try it.
Well, I have a Toronto Buffalo dojo that I teach at, so come on down. Nowadays it's in Buffalo.
In Buffalo.
Every other month I teach in Buffalo. And then on the odd month I was telling David, I do cyber lesson, which I've been doing for 35 years. Over the internet, I have a system of, they take a lesson over the internet when I can't come up, because I can't go to Buffalo every month. But every other month I can. I go to Rochester and Ithaca and Syracuse, upstate New York as well. But Buffalo's the closest to Toronto.
Oh, we'd love to come. We'd love to go see you. It's only an hour and a 15-minute drive for us.
Close.
So. Where? Yeah. When is it? The end of March?
The next one.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
It's on my website.
Okay.
I think I did this month already, so it's not going to be till the beginning of May.
Okay.
And then I do my annual Japan trip with my students in May. But it's every other month, so I just did March, and then May, then July, and then September, on the odd months.
Now, for someone like me who doesn't have an instrument and just wants to give it a shot, are there rental sukihachis?
Well, the very beginning flutes are not that expensive. They're $120. And if a student changes their mind, I'm always willing to buy it back for whatever the student paid for it. So it's kind of like having money in the bank without interest, so to speak. The instruments like this, or the two I'm playing today, really are expensive, though. Like most Japanese things, if you get something of a really fine quality, it's 5 figures. It's a lot of money. Yeah.
So this event that you're going to in Buffalo or Rochester, is that open to the public, or is it just for your students?
Sure, but most of the time I do an intensive in those two cities there, because I'm only there 6 times a year, and I teach cyber lessons 6 times a year. So generally speaking, just to give Honkyoku, or the Zen music, the original pieces, I do an intensive every time I go there. Somebody wants, like a beginning student, I'll let them sit in on the Honkyoku intensive, but I won't charge them, because I don't think it would be worth their money. They'd be lost, but they might find it interesting. And meanwhile, I would be hoping that they decide to take a private lesson too, which is what so everyone that's up there, I give private lessons to, and the Honkyoku. I have a student that comes down from Guelph, and another student in Toronto who usually prefers doing all cyber lessons rather than come down to Buffalo. People have their own preferences. I once had a student who only lived 2 miles from my studio in New York City, and she preferred cyber lessons also. It's just some people are very busy.
Yeah.
But sure, you're very, very welcome. Maybe this is a good time, since we're talking about Canada. I should mention some of my dear friends who are also teaching in Canada. You don't have to use me. Probably the one who is doing the most work, although, well, there's 2 people. One is Debbie Danbrook. She was perhaps the first teacher. I think she's still out of Toronto. And she pretty much is specifically for healing on shakuhachi. You could find her on the net, and probably in Toronto. Al Ramos, who's out in Vancouver, does a lot of new things with Japanese drummers, sometimes even Mongolian musicians, and as well as the traditional. And he brings a group to Japan every year also, and they dig their own bamboo and make their own shakuhachis, which is a lot of fun.
Wow.
And I have a jazz saxophone student for many years back named Michel Dubois, who's out of Montreal, I believe, area, and another student who has been in New York now for a while, that's from Montreal, named Aaron Schraga. and he plays a very interesting raga music on trumpet as well as shakuhachi. He has a microtonal trumpet that he's made with the slide and the valves.
Oh my goodness!
He has a custom made for himself, and he's I think he's performing in Montreal this weekend actually. So there is shakuhachi alive and well in Canada also.
So it doesn't seem like a very popular instrument in North America.
Japan, it was just me. I just named all those people. That's very popular compared to zero. No, it's an instrument that's growing in popularity, and we have international conventions every 4 years. The last one last year was in Kyoto, and 4 years before that was in Sydney, Australia, and 4 years before that I sponsored the one in New York City, and 2 years before that was Tokyo, and 4 years before that was Boulder, Colorado. And I believe next year will be Prague in Europe, and 2 years after that in China. So it's popular compared to when I left Japan. There was no shakuhachi outside of it. And people would do it sometimes as a hobby, Japanese people particularly, but no one was crazy enough to try and make their living with it like I'm doing. But I've been very fortunate.
Well, I think you're doing great work, and I find your music very powerful, very powerful. That's another question I have for you. How for this album, The Healing Art of Zen Shakuhachi, for this album, when would you recommend someone listen to it?
Whenever they can. The way CDs aren't selling nowadays, CDs seem to be a thing of the past. I have probably 100 different tunes on YouTube that people can download, if they want to do that, which is what young people do want to do. They don't, and I can understand it because financially, sometimes, like my latest CD has, I think, let's say 7 pieces on it. So people download it for $1 per piece. Even if you wanted all 7 pieces, that ends up costing you $7. But the CD is for sale for $15.
Mm-hmm.
So why would somebody want to spend twice? I mean, just for the cover, maybe. Or us old timers like to have actual hard copy, of a CD. But in general, the last 3 years, I've been putting out DVDs of solo recitals. I think maybe the reason that I've gone more in live direction like that is because I realized that so many of my recordings were just one take, which is so different than when I was playing popular music and we do 80 takes over 3 months or something. But my first couple of recordings for shakuhachi, I used to do 2 takes, what's called a safety take, in case something was wrong with the master, the first take. And I kept finding time after time that wasn't necessary. The master was fine, So I stopped doing the safety take. And then I guess, I was just thinking about that today. I think the reason I'm moving more towards more live things is because it's always been kind of that live spontaneity, and it seems like it's improvised music, but it isn't. It's all written down. All like Japanese, anything, you're supposed to copy your teacher, which I'm still doing as close as you can. And they say after 40 or 50 years, no 2 spirits are exactly the same, so you'll develop in an evolutionary way rather than a revolutionary way. Your own heart, it'll be expressed. Your own style will come out.
Now, when you're playing to an audience, have you seen a transformation with your audience?
Sometimes. Or sometimes they fall asleep. That's good, too. They get real peaceful and just nod off. But there are certain things that are important in Japan, particularly the Zen music, that would be important in all music, but it's not consciously thought of. For example, you said you played piano and guitar. If I play, I'll give you an example. If I play a C, which is not called a C, of course, in Japanese, it's a ri on this instrument, for a certain amount of time, and then a silence, a certain amount of time, and then play a D for a certain amount of time, without thinking about how I'm going to go into the C or the D, then the silence will sound one way, like this. If I play the same C, but make it shaped like a funnel or shaped like a wedge, get softer and softer and softer until it's a silence, same amount of time, silence, same amount of time, and play the D, sasabuki, shaped like a bamboo leaf, starting off small, getting larger, getting smaller again, it's going to affect how I'm playing the silence. The silence is part of the composition. So listen to the difference of how the silence feels with the same C, same D, but a different shape.
Wow.
It sounds deeper, sounds more quiet, more silent, if that's a valid way to put it. So
that's beautiful.
That's how you end a note, how you begin the next note is something that's very conscious in shakuhachi composition, whereas it's there in all music, of course, but a lot of times in the West we just, play a quarter tone or whatever, and then have a rest and then just go on to the next note. So that's one different way of listening to shakuhachi. The aesthetic is different.
Is a healing song different from another?
Well, some are. I have one song that's for slow learning children to help them learn faster.
Oh.
And then there's the easy childbirth piece, and there's a lot of the healing music is, I wouldn't generalize and say all, but a lot of it is of the very simple style. There are pieces that just go like this. It's quiet and simple, whereas Jimbo Sanya, Jimbo's version of the Sanya, is an exception to that. One section, for example, that's not so quiet on Jimbo Sanya goes. There's a piece. Buddhism in Japan is usually associated with death, and birth and weddings and getting a new Toyota is all associated with Shinto, the native religion.
Okay.
So Buddhism, it's a lot of funereal pieces in my repertoire, but they're for the safe passage of the spirit into its next incarnation. So I have my own favorite piece that I play. And the 29th of this month, one of my students passed away. He had prostate cancer for many years. There's a memorial for him down in Philadelphia. And he requested me to, and while he was still alive, because he knew his time was limited, that I play this piece at his memorial. And then that day, then I run back up to New York City and play at my dojo's name is Kisuian, at Kisuian's 37th annual recital. So that's another busy day in New York. But that's another type of healing piece. It's for the safe passage of the spirit into its next incarnation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've enjoyed this.
Do you have time? Do you want me to play anything for you? I mean, outside of those little examples, or you think you got enough with the CD?
Oh wow! I love how you demonstrated the pieces. I love that. That's great. And how and the techniques are they look very difficult to me.
They are, but everyone gets them eventually, and everyone can play them. But they express your own spirit. Not everyone plays it the same. Actually, eventually, ultimately, everyone plays them differently. But it's the same thing when you're interpreting a Bach or Beethoven. You know, a serious classical musician will have their own. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but there's wiggle room, so to speak, for interpretation. You know.
Is there anything you'd like to add to this that we haven't really gotten into, and that just something you'd like to add?
I'd like you to give me a plug for my website at some point. You could do that on the screen afterwards.
For sure.
But
For sure.
just because, particularly when we're talking about, I do have students, the cyber students, in 26 states and 6 foreign countries. So even if you're nowhere near Buffalo, or I teach up and down the East Coast of the United States, and even if you're nowhere near that, the cyber lessons are they're not as good. I think face-to-face is better, but they're better than Skype, although we're coming out great today, and you look wonderful to me on Skype, but some days I've had trouble with Skype, and the biggest problem for me teaching a lesson on Skype, because I have done that, is you can't sing with the student and you can't play with the student. You get feedback. So my system that I was telling David about is within software called Audacity, and with the FTP sort of system, which is easy to explain even from an old dinosaur like me, not part of the cyber age, and easy to set up, free. And it's free software, and it works good. I've been doing it. I started doing it with cassettes back in the day, you know, and then moved on to .Mac and all these different systems. But then once Mac went to the cloud, that didn't work for me because people had to have their own folder. So without getting into a lot of details, the system I have now works very well. I want to let people know that that's available. If they're near, like Al Ramos in Vancouver, though, or Debbie Danbrook, they're excellent teachers in their own right.
Mention the person in Toronto again.
That's Debbie Danbrook.
Debbie Danbrook. Okay.
No, but she's teaching, but she had a lot of recordings with healing music on Shakuhachi. She's been doing this for at least 30 years.
Do you find people are creating their own healing music with the Shakuhachi?
She does, yeah. I have a old dear a high school friend named Stephen Halpern, who calls himself the father of New Age music. He's actually gets all kinds of honors. Was Grammy nominated last year. I did a collaboration with him on his latest CD. I think it was called. I can't see it at this angle, but I think it was called either Deep Alpha or Beta, something like that. And if you look up Stephen Halpern, that's for people who like New Age music. Then I don't do much with that, but Stephen and I go back a long ways, so that was fun to work with him.
This is amazing. It's so great to finally talk to you. I've looked at your album and wondered about you, and finally, this has been great.
Thanks for thinking about me and having me with you.
Thank you, Ronnie. It's been a pleasure talking with you about the Shakuhachi. For more information about Ronnie and where he'll be performing and about his classes, go to his website at nyogetsu.com or visit zintarsurs.com. Until next time, I'm Nina Hilger.